Hey there, folks. So welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's a big one. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Father John Misty called Pure Comedy. You know, I think there were a lot of people really surprised by I Love You, Honey Bear in 2015. Hell, I was surprised. I had liked Josh Tillman's debut album under the Father John Misty moniker, Fear Fun, but his 2015 follow-up, that was in a different ballpark of quality. Huge, lush production, a knack for incredibly sticky melodies, and a narrative through line that was as witty and twisted as it was genuine and heartfelt and really well constructed. I'll wholeheartedly admit the album's warped yet self-aware framing did require a certain headspace to really appreciate, especially considering the romantic relationship that was being explored in plenty of lurid detail. But yeah, it really connected for me. Very nearly my top album of 2015. But then comes the much bigger question. How the hell do you follow that up? The grand romance of I Love You, Honey Bear was so well structured, a little self-contained masterpiece that I really appreciated. And sure, while Father John Misty had flirted with social commentary on that album, I was a little bit unsure how well it could connect on an entire project, which was what Pure Comedy was reporting to do. Because let's get very real here. Even if Father John Misty's insight had proven valid, I could see a lot of people dismissing it because of both the delivery and the messenger himself, especially if it threw in elements of self-aware satire, which can rub some people the wrong way if they don't get it. What I'm saying is that it's a fine line to walk, and while I was reasonably confident that he could pull it off, I was tempering my expectations a lot going into Pure Comedy. So, did Josh Tillman manage to do it? Well, it's kind of tricky to say, but that's more because Josh Tillman set out to make a very different record than what I Love You, Honey Bear was. One that I'm almost certain will alienate a lot of his newfound audience that hopped on board for that last album because of all the hype. And let's make two things very clear. One, he knows exactly what he's doing and trying to push back the audience that came for the spectacle and doesn't really get the message of what he's saying. And two, that the content as it is doesn't really bother me. I've heard and covered far more twisted stories and albums this year. And yet, this might be one of those cases where Josh Tillman succeeded a little bit more than he otherwise intended, because I can't say I like this nearly as much as I did I Love You, Honey Bear. Don't get me wrong, it's still a great album, but it's also a little bit more bloated, a little more directionless, and lacking the focus that made his last album so potent for me, from the content to especially the production and delivery. Again, this is a great record, but I don't really see it rising to be among the best of the year like I Love You, Honey Bear was. So let's start off with the delivery, because this is arguably where there's the biggest shift in comparison with that last album. Oh, not with Josh Tillman himself. His voice is still liquid and capable of incredible emotive charisma, from his deeper, sardonic baritone to a quivering yet very clear falsetto. He's not as bombastic this time around, and that was a little bit disappointing. And while only the title track really mirrors some of the explosive intensity that his delivery would show up on songs like The Ideal Husband 2 years ago, he's aiming to downplay significantly here, relying on subtle hints of reverb to draw out the lonely musings that run across this album. And I'd argue musing is the best word here, because while Josh Tillman has always played a little bit fast and loose with song structure, Pure Comedy is going to take its sweet damn time across nearly a full album of ballads to really tease out the philosophical ideas that he wants to explore. And let me establish this now. The reason I'd argue this album feels longer than it probably should is because it keeps a very low, understated tone for the majority of its runtime, comfortably lodged in the mid-70s AM piano rock, singer-songwriter tones, a lot of piano and guitar that I might like, but it can start to run together if you're not paying attention to the little details. Granted, how much some of those details might work for you is also an open question, because while they might be better integrated than when they were on True Affection, those subtle hints of electronics are definitely back, sometimes coming through in slightly stiffer beats, sometimes through a pitch-shifted backing vocal layer on Smoochie, sometimes through thicker hints of distortion or warped reverse samples on things that might have been helpful to know before the Revolution or Birdie, or in the most striking and probably the most effective case, the bridge on the Memo, where Josh Tillman uses it to make a stark postmodernist point about gentrification that hit home a lot more effectively than I really expected. It's a really great little production trick and it came out really well. And yet, while there are lush lush musical elements that still come through, like the horns on the title track, the acoustic piano bar bounce of Total Entertainment Forever. It honestly kind of reminded me a little of Billy Joel. The subtle hints of a former bass line on Ballad of the Dying Man. The gorgeous swells of strings on the album's centerpiece, Leaving LA, and later on two wildly different perspectives. The slightly hollow and unstable elegance of A Bigger Paper Bag, and the touches of ethereal gospel vocals around When the God of Love Returns, There'll Be Hell to Pay. You know, it's impossible not to notice that there is, well, a little less momentum and structure to these songs overall. A little bit more of a barren experience that intentionally draws more focus to the words. Which, sure, that can work for a certain style of socially aware message. I've heard this before. But if I circle back to my general qualifiers for strong political art, it can't help but cut into any sense of deeper populism. Most people, like it or not, aren't going to have the patience to listen through a 12-minute broadside fired against Los Angeles that then mutates into a discussion of the modern music scene and Josh Tillman's role in all of it. Sure, I might love it. Leaving LA is a tremendous song and leaves on one of the most beautiful open notes. It's one of the most personal and effective cuts on the entire album. But look, I'm a critic. I've got no qualms at listening to songs at this length, and doing it with the self-awareness doesn't mean that you're not still doing it. And while I know Josh Tillman is doing this in order to refine his own artistic message, one that for the most part I actually kind of agree with, at the same time, by sacrificing the tightness of his melodies and song structures, he necessarily cuts down on the people who would be willing and able to receive his message. And that can be a very mixed blessing indeed. So okay, what is that grand message that Father John Misty is looking to explore and convey to us audience? Well, again, this is where I'm going to question how much of dramatic impact this record will have overall, because it is nowhere near as self-contained as I Love You Honey Bear was. Sure, that record had its momentary digressions, but they were essential for highlighting the self-awareness and yet very real earnestness in a lot of Josh Tillman's delivery. Sarcasm and artifice, it was subverted with humor and real ideals. But here, it's hard not to feel that Josh Tillman is aiming much more broadly, targeting on the very first track showing humanity's genesis, its blind adherence towards faith and religion, along with a lot of sexual politics, the obsession with those who do not believe, which is really critical to understanding this album, we'll come back to it, and indeed how we're all so insignificant in the end in the grand vastness of space. One could easily make the assertion this is a profoundly nihilistic record, but we're all so pitiful in the grand scheme of all things that in the eye of any higher power, that the most we can do is understand and accept our own worst natures. But Josh Tillman's a smarter guy than that, and his exploration of faith and religion is easily some of the most compelling stuff on this album, especially tempered with the knowledge that he's very easily including himself in a lot of the same picture and a lot of the same framing. Take Ballad of the Dying Man, which tells the story of an older fellow who believes his views are vital to the world, and now on his deathbed he bitterly wishes that he could rail against those he despised one last time, really set them in their place. When in reality, it's an open question how much he really knew from the start, and how that dying man could very well be Josh Tillman himself. And while he might have some of his more brazen segments scorning corrupt or broken systems, which he wants nothing to do with, Leaving LA, targeting the songwriting industry, In Between the Lines on Birdie, which made some nice little coy references to Twitter, I thought was a nice touch, especially on the Memo across those verses, but he at least seems a lot more sympathetic, or at least willing to observe that other and find common ground, like on two wildly different perspectives between left and right, or on When the God of Love Returns, There'll Be Hell to Pay, which places him taking God on a tour of the world at the apocalypse and showing, despite the very deep rift between God and man, that distant higher power and humankind, they still share so much in common and hoping for more out of all of us. And then there's things that might have been helpful to know before the revolution, which isn't so much a skewering of social activism or social anarchism on the left, so much as it is just a warning to consider the consequences and the reality that said capitalist systems, they serve a purpose, and they provide conveniences that many people are ignoring except when they lose them. Of course, all this does tend to be a lot less funny or crass than much of the antics and subtle jibes on I Love You Honey Bear, and I can tell that will alienate some people. And it's also hard not to notice that Josh Tillman has the flexibility and options for that sort of balanced consideration because, hell, the system has rewarded him for that sort of balance. Which, of course, he knows makes a point to reference and then skewer his own hypocrisy on Leaving LA. But really, he tipped his hand on a couple songs earlier on Ballad of the Dying Man. He's not the leader of any revolution, despite his statements, and the inclusion of of songs highlighting his own flailing and struggles with alcohol on a bigger paper bag, or the frankly overlong So I'm Growing Old on Magic Mountain, make it clear that he never wanted that responsibility and he's the wrong person to shoulder it. Because at the end of the day, we are the furthest thing from the center of the universe, and it could all end and there be nothing we could do to stop it or face it. And yet, he looks at his wife as their next round arrives, and This Must Be the Place by the Talking Heads comes on at the bar, and he knows that while he'll laugh at the cosmic accident and miracle of our bumbling existence, he'll cherish it all the same, accepting your part in the joke and then laughing to just, keep on living. Hell, I think a lot of people are going to dismiss this project. It's bloated, it's rambling, it gets into some controversial territory that's baiting an audience that will undoubtedly rise to that bait, and it's entirely up its own postmodernist ass. And you know what? It knows it. And while I do think songs, they aren't quite as individually sharp to really bring more people in on the joke, which I think would overall help the popular appeal, I do think this is a joke worth telling, worth hearing. It's pure comedy in that regard. For me, strong 8 out of 10, definitely a recommendation. I do like I Love You Honey Bear more, but I can see those who get this album finding it more resonant and taking at least that bigger picture. As it is, as a sort of sharp, witty, self-deprecating, and yet painfully honest singer-songwriter project that deserves a lot of attention. Definitely check it out. It's a good joke. You want to hear it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I'm curious where people are going to fall on this album. So I got the poll up here. So hey, where'd you guys going to vote on it? Because I know some people are absolutely crazy about it, and I know some other people thought it was really boring. But if you want to get it and find out for yourself, links in the description below. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get more involved in my scheduling process, the link to my Patreon is right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on records going up and down my schedule, and once a week on Saturdays, you guys get to add records to my schedule. More detail right there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.
I relive it most times.